I'm not going to tell any more of her story and let her do it. I'll introduce the beautiful and talented Kris.
All right.
Geez, no pressure there, right? I sat next to Ray. First I sat next to DJ who talked about, we talked about praying before speaking, and then I talked to Ray, and Ray talked about, told me who all the heavy hitters were in the room. I'm like, I better be good, and all that. So that made me kind of think, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray that what I was taught the first time I spoke, to ask God to get me out of the way so that he could send his message through and use me as a vessel. So we're going to say that prayer together, and you can all say amen, and then if I suck, it's your fault too. So, okay. God, please help me to let my ego get out of the way, use me as a vessel, and let me speak whatever message it is that you feel somebody here needs to hear. Amen. Amen. All right, so remember, if I suck, it's your fault. That being said, that made me think, too, as I was sitting here, because my day was full bore. So I didn't think about speaking at all until I sat here. And then I wasn't really even thinking about speaking, but I thought about prayer. So before, my mom was excommunicated from the Catholic Church before I was born. So I can tell you the times I prayed. I was 4, and I prayed, "Now I lay me down to sleep," which terrified me. Then I went into my Catholic preschool and showed them a quarter and said, "This is God," for show and tell, because it looked like God. It said, "In God we trust," and I soon found out that was not God, though it is many people's God. So that was the first time I prayed. I prayed after, when my grandfather was molesting me, to please stop. That didn't happen. I prayed many times after I started drinking, when I found myself in similar situations. I prayed when I was miscarrying that I wouldn't lose the babies, and I did. I prayed when my brother was dying that he wouldn't die, and he did. I prayed lots of times, please get me out of this bind, and I promise I'll follow you. And I did get out of all of those binds, because obviously I'm still here today, and I never held up my side of the bargain because of all those times that my prayers weren't answered. So when I came into AA, and I saw the God stuff, whew, that was scary, and then I was told that I had to find a power greater than myself. And I remember thinking, how am I going to pull this off, and so I'll talk about that part later. But those were my experiences with God. So as a 4-year-old, when I did that show and tell, I remember thinking, because the nuns would make us all pray, and they were scary. You pray, and then they'd hit you on your knuckles with a ruler. They were just scary. But I remember my 4-year-old mind looked at all the kids who prayed so easily and thought, oh, they must have been born with that faith, and God forgot about me. And I went through a lot of my life. When I came into AA, I would look at people too and go, oh, they must have been, they sound different than I feel, So anyway, I was born into a family of heavy drinkers. My dad's a heavy drinker. I used to think he was alcoholic. I don't know. My mom was raised in crazy alcoholism. My grandfather used to go down the steps naked, going, "Ooh, I'm an Indian," when all of her girlfriends were there. He was he was a full-blown crazy drunk. And my mom started drinking probably, when I was 8 or 9. To catch up with my dad, so she can hang out with him. And that's when it kind of got a little crazy in my home, as far as what I grew up in. I know that before that, though, I will say that she was scary, and I would, as a little kid, before I'd go out in the room, wonder if I could, is it safe, so I was affected by alcoholism from the get-go, So I can say that, my whole life has been filled with it, but also with recovery, too, part of it, so. And it led me here. So, as I said, we lived on Guam for a while. We moved back. We lived in my grandfather's house, and he molested me when I was 8. And the reason I say that is because it changed me. It broke my entire trust system. And for years I would say it, but I didn't feel it until one day when I was in recovery. And then, but I was able to work through it. But it impacted all my relationships. Because if you loved me, I didn't trust you. Like you were a stranger, I trusted you. And it impacted me in ways I never knew. And it also, I think, set me up for my first drink, because as I got into like that preteen, I was tall, I'm kind of tall, so I was taller than most of the girls and most of the boys. I remember that. And just really uncomfortable in my skin. And, so that led me to my first drink, which was behind the arcade with 2 boys and my girlfriend, And boy, I tell you, it was Michelob. I remember being a little scared, but boy, once I took that sip, well, I loved the way it tasted. I already loved the way it tasted, but the way it made me feel, it filled in every crack and crevice I had. It made me whole. I heard a guy in Pennsylvania, when he shared, he said the first time he picked up a drink, and then he read the promises. And that, I can say, was true for me, too. I knew a new freedom and a new happiness. I did not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I saw where my experience could benefit others. All of those things came true, right? Here's the thing. When it wore off, every time it wore off for the next 17 years, I was a little more broken than when I started. And it worked a little less than that first time. So I had my first drink. I got caught. I came home with a big hickey on my neck. I got grounded for the entire summer. I was 13, and I never once thought, I'm not going to do that again. I thought, how am I going to do that and not get caught? Because this was the answer. Like, the next year we talked about college and stuff, and I already knew, I can't do that. Like, first of all, it will require, something from me. Second of all, I was already blacking out, so I knew that wouldn't play out very well in the fraternities. So it already impacted my life. The one thing I knew was that I was going to do this for the rest of my life, drink. And that's what I proceeded to do. So by 15, I was a full-on blackout drunk. By 17 or 18, I was politely asked to leave in April of my senior year because I had cumed out. I had 86 absences. And I had enough credits, so they said mail $10 in and get your GED. But it was the first thing I quit, and it impacted me, and it set me up for a series of quittings. So the next thing I did was beauty school. I'm a beauty school dropout because by the time I was supposed to have 800 hours, I had 200 hours because I'd go out, I'd start tying one on because Mom would pass out, and I'd start hitting her beer, and then I would go out, and then I would come home, and that was my MO. I'd wake up often and do that one eye kind of thing, like, where am I? Am I safe? Who's here? Who am I with? Sometimes I was in my bedroom. Sometimes I was in a place that I had no idea with people I didn't know. And that happened every night, So I guess I was about 20 and I thought, man, I should probably go in the Navy, because I knew I was out of control and I needed some control. But then I thought, that's probably going to be really hard. They're going to want me to get up and do stuff. So then I thought, I could get married. That would bring me in. So I met this guy, and he kept coming back, no matter how much I did, whenever I did blackouts. And I don't even remember talking marriage. I just remember we bought rings and we got married. And his name was Kris. And I told you say Kris, yeah, Kris. So he was not an alcoholic. He did not drink like I drank. He was older than me. He was a gambler, and he was very controlling. And I mistook that for love. He was also abusive. So that marriage didn't last all that long. I remember we had broken up. We had gotten back together. He's the one that I had the miscarriages with. At the same time, I lost my brother to AIDS. Within a year, I had 2 miscarriages, and my brother died of AIDS in 1986. Early on, stigmatized, much like what's going on today with fentanyl. Very stigmatized death. So grieving was really hard, and I was in a really bad place mentally. And anyway, we split up. We got back together. And it wasn't working because he was the first person who called me an alcoholic in this heavy Greek accent. And I didn't like that. And then he was trying to control my drinking. It's like he had to go. So I was really kind of looking, because I wasn't one to leave until I had something lined up that was, of course, God's will or fate. You know, it must be, because it felt good, right? So I remember ironing his shirt. It was March 27th. I'm ironing his shirt to go to a party with people that I work with, which was a glorified keg party. It was a christening. So I ironed his shirt, I kissed him goodbye, I went to this christening, and I met this guy. And I got home at 5:30 in the morning. I had to climb in the kitchen window because I couldn't find my keys. Meanwhile, I drove home, but that was just the kind of drunk I was. And I didn't have any underwear, you know that. So you know how that went. I don't, because I was in a blackout. I knew the next day, like, I couldn't be that kind of person, so I had to make this God's will or fate. I had to make this a real relationship. So I proceeded to go try and track him down, stalk him, basically. And then once I got him in the corner at a party, I was like, my marriage is over. Now I could go home and tell my husband that our marriage was over. So I did. I went home and said, this is over. And so that was March 27th. Kris moved out April 12th. I thought, whew, I'm going to live by myself and, you know, have some fun for a while. Well, by May 17th, I couldn't afford to live alone, either emotionally or financially. So Adam moved in. June 7th, I found out I was pregnant. I got divorced September 14th, and I got remarried October 8th. And that is what my I changed all the players. Forget geographical cures. Just change everybody out. And this guy drank like I drank. His motto was drink hard and drive fast, or drive fast and drink, whatever. One of those. And it was like, it must be love. It was love. It was a lot of fun. And we had our first child, and I drank when I was pregnant with her. We had a second one 9 months later, because what a good idea. One's good, two's better, right? That's my motto. And it was a few years later, I guess they were 3 and 4, when he started telling me that if I didn't stop drinking, he was going to leave me and take the kids. He could stop drinking for periods of time, which I didn't understand, but I fully took advantage of, because then I could have all of the alcohol and he could drive, you know. But it took what was a beautiful, sweet relationship and turned it into something really ugly. You know, there'd be fights, and then eventually I'd get him so mad that he'd punch a hole in the wall, and then we could start over. You know, it was like a reset. So anyway, he was threatening to leave me. And, you know, I was at that point praying, like, if something happens, I'll stop. I was telling him I'd stop, and then I'd be loading the kids in the car in the afternoon, because I just couldn't breathe. And my head was just so loud, and I was really uncomfortable. I was now what I know to be restless, irritable, and discontent. And I would drive to the liquor store, and I'd take that first sip, and I could exhale. You know, and as that progressed, that didn't really change. Like, the relief came when I was in the car driving, because once I took a sip, then I knew, like, I did it again. All of this stuff kind of happened in a year. So I was praying for something to happen. I started telling myself that I wasn't going to drink. Like, I'd wake up and I'd go, I'm not going to drink today. My kids would wake me up, Mommy, please get up, I'm hungry. And I would hear them, like, in the kitchen climbing on the cabinets. You know, I'd hear the M&Ms hit the floor and go rolling. Andrew came up to me with, like, so much, with Parmesan cheese. His diaper was so soaked in urine, and we had pizza the night before, and he was, like, eating the cheese. I can remember that. And I remember thinking at the time, too, or maybe once when I first got sober, like, if I had seen that on Oprah, I would have been appalled. She should have her kids taken away from her immediately. But I could not see that in myself, you know. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was a horrible stay-at-home mom. I would go to parties and bring the monitor with me. I can hear them. But anyway, so I would tell myself I wasn't going to drink. I'd end up drinking. And I prayed, and one night I went out, and I got a DUI. And I took that as a sign that this was it, right? And I went home and I woke up my husband and told him, I have a problem, I'm an alcoholic. And I felt a little relief, you know? And then as the sun came up, I called my mother and told her, and I called my father, and I called my friends, you know, and I felt a little relief. Until the next day when I thought, what the heck did I do? You know, I just was rushing that like that, you know. Now what am I gonna do? So I white knuckled it for 72 days. And I remember it was right before court, and I was reading an article in Parade magazine that talked about, it was a great article. It said, do you ever wake up and you can't remember the events from hours or days? I was like, yeah, God. Do you ever wake up with unexplained bruises? Absolutely. Do you ever wake up and you feel like you've been probed? Oh my God. And then it said, you may have been abducted by aliens. I swear, when I die, I'm going back to the mothership. You were. But I so wanted to bring that into the court and be like, honestly, Your Honor. It was, yeah, it's aliens. No, seriously. Inside, I really wanted that to be true because, you know, alcohol was the solution for so long. How could it now be the problem? How could it be turned on me? You know, so I went to 72 days. I went to court, but I worked 2 jobs at the time. I worked in fine dining and I worked at a truck stop. That's 2 sides. So I'm at the truck stop, and we would often go out after, and I wasn't going to drink, so I drink 18 club sodas. And but there was one woman who went, and she let us know that she was sober. You know, she'd shoot pool with us. So when, you know, the next night I drank 18 club sodas. The next night I drank 18 drinks, and then I went up to Jackie and said, "How did you get sober?" You know, and she took me to my first AA meeting, and it was a meditation meeting. There were 5 people there. I was one of 5. They handed me a piece of paper. I got within a very short period of time that they're all going, "Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm an alcoholic." Like, oh, I'm going to have to say I'm an alcoholic. Like, so I faked my way through that one or whatever I did. And then they said, okay, we're going to meditate for 30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up. Oh my God. For 30 minutes of silence, my head was screaming. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I stayed for the whole meeting because I'm not one to do that, but it was like I left and I was not ever coming back there. And then I went out and drank again and found myself at a different AA meeting. And this one I would go to. Tim, this guy Tim, is a good friend of mine. He would come, he'd see me walk up, and he'd be like, gotta stay away from the first one. I was like, no, it's not the first one, it's the 8th one. He's like, no, it's not the caboose that'll kill you, you know? And I'd go out and try. The next time I went out, I was like, I ordered 2. I numbered them 1 and 2. I pushed 1 aside and started with 2. Didn't work. I ended up in the same place. Then I'd go the next time, and he'd be like, you're not gonna remember how bad you feel, like a week or whatever. And I even knew it hours. Like, you won't remember how you feel right now, and you will want to drink again. And the next time I went out, I saw that. I had a woman come up to me and say, honey, well, a couple things. It's easier to stay sober than it is to get sober. And honey, you didn't have a slip. You made a choice. Because we didn't pick up white chips up there. I have never picked up a white chip, except for the one that used to sit in my recliner. Yeah, I'll talk about him later. But in New Jersey, you'd raise your hand and say, I had a slip. And she's like, you didn't have a slip. I've seen you here for more than 3 days, so I know you detoxed. You didn't have a slip. You made a choice. And I hated her. But the next time I went out and drank, I thought about that like, I am making a choice. You know? And anyway, this went on for a little bit of time till the last night I went out. And actually, I went to an AA meeting that night. The night before that, I had written in my journal at that time, I wanted to drink so bad. I got my husband to drop me off at what I thought was a 3 o'clock meeting. It was a 7 o'clock meeting. So basically, I sat there for an hour, and he picked me up. And somebody took me to a meeting that night, and I wrote in my journal, I made it. And then the next day came, and I remember my husband was on the phone and he was complaining about something, and I was like, we should drink. And then he gave me this kind of nasty look, and I was like, only joking. But what I did in my mind was I knew I was getting picked up by Jackie, who now Jackie, I didn't know, but Jackie, when she took me to my meeting, was having an affair. She had just started smoking pot, and by now she was drinking and doing other things. So Jackie was trying to get sober again after 4 years in recovery. So Jackie picked me up to go to the meeting, and so this was in my mind. I'm going to that meeting. If I don't hear exactly what I need to hear, I'm going to the bar, and I can get Jackie to take me, right? So I go to the meeting, and they're like, is anybody having a problem with staying away from a drink with alcoholism? I'm not saying nothing, you know? So then they said, does anybody have a topic? And this woman goes, I'd like to talk about the joys of sobriety. I was out of there. I sat there till the meeting was over. As soon as we got outside, I was like, you want to go to the bar? Jackie was like, yeah. I said, okay. And we went to the bar. And for whatever reason, I like to think it's God's grace. I did not black out that night. I was in a car. I was with a guy. I was going, yeah, no. He would have been my future ex-husband, I guess. And he said, go home. And I went home. And the next day I got up and I looked in the mirror, and God, I hadn't looked in my eyes in a long time. And I just remember looking and going, God, it's true. So now I know that to be an A when they say we have to concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. That's what that was. I don't really believe in bottoms. I know it as a bottom after I passed it, but I mean, I've had way worse ones. You know, when I was 17, I stuck my thumb out and I woke up in a blackout. I came out of a blackout in Army barracks. Wasn't my intention when I went out that night. So I've had worse bottoms on the outside. What I've noticed, and after living with Chip, you know, him falling off the porch and have a spinal cord injury, you'd think that would be, is the common thing is that it's an inside thing. It's between your head and your heart, and it's a conversion experience. Like, it doesn't matter what the outside is, it is what it says in the big book. We have to concede to our innermost selves that we're alcoholic and we can't drink like others. I think that's what it is. I'm not a quoter, but so, you know, because believe me, there's always worse bottoms out there, and so I think it's just that we have to have a defining moment, and then we have to have the willingness to take some actions, you know. So the cool thing was when I looked in the mirror, and first I thought, oh my God, my life is over. I got a willingness that I didn't have before, because when I came before, when I was going in and out, they were saying get a sponsor, call before you go out and drink, don't take me through the wreckage, all the things I wouldn't do, you know, get a home group, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, you know. All of a sudden I was willing to do anything. And I went to a meeting and I got appointed a sponsor. She was Miss Joni. She looked like Yoda. And she had like 100 years. And yeah, she was my temporary sponsor. I got a home group. And that was a hard decision because I could join the one with all the really good looking guys, you know, that felt like high school. Or I could join the one that I went to that Monday night, which had a bunch of really stable people. And I joined the one that had a bunch of really stable people. And I got a coffee commitment. I had it for 9 months. I loved that. I mean, that kept me showing up, kept me responsible. I learned early on, the one thing I grasped was don't drink no matter what. Yeah. Don't drink no matter what. When I did that, it forced me, because I wanted to drink, and I knew I was going to want to drink based on my experience and based on what was in the big book. So it forced me to find other solutions. Yeah. That thing where it said you're not going to remember what the events of a week or a month ago, whatever it says, a day or a week ago, I wrote down on a little piece of paper and I folded it up and kept it in my wallet. The things I wrote were coming out of that blackout in those Army barracks. My son with the Parmesan cheese. You know, the ugly places. And there were other stuff on there that I don't need to tell you. I just needed to be able to look at it. When I would go to a 10 a.m. meeting, and at 11, I'd sit in the deli, because it's Jersey, and I'd be waiting for the noon meeting, and I wanted to drink. And I would take that little piece of paper out, and I would read it. Because I didn't have cell phones then, you know. So I'd read that, because that was truth. It didn't happen every time, but it was truth. This is where alcohol took me, and that would keep me from drinking until the noon meeting. And then, so I got another sponsor shortly after that, because I started calling women, and there was this woman I connected with. I started picking up the phone every day. I got sober in January of 1994 in New Jersey. Buku amount of blizzards. I love to drink in a blizzard. God, lock me up. And so it was about 2 weeks, which was about as long as I could go without drinking. And it was a blizzard. And my husband was stuck up at his parents or my parents. And typically I would go across this, like when we bought our house, we made sure that you could walk to a bar. That was one of the prerequisites. So I knew it was a problem, and I picked up the phone that afternoon and I started down the list of women. And I finally got this woman, Tara, and she's like, how are you doing? This is rigorous honesty. I'm not good. You know, and I had been picking up the phone every day. What's the matter? I want to drink. You know, can you make it we talked a little bit. Can you make it the rest of the day? No. Can you make it 1 hour? No. Can you make it 5 minutes while I switch phones? Yes. She walked me through the day. And at 8:30 that night, she said, go to bed. You just made it through your first snowstorm sober. You have sober experience. And I went to bed. And it snowed probably 3 or 4 more times. I want to say, I think I looked it up, and there were 18 storms that year. So she got me through that first day. And she became my sponsor later on. But Nancy was my sponsor. They said, pick somebody who has what you wanted. And I liked the way she dressed. I liked her hair. She was an artist. She was real. Yeah, she was me. She was me back then. But she was really cool. And she's the one who helped me a lot. I'd be like, I'm having trouble with the spiritual part. And she said, let me make it really easy, Kris. There's no spiritual part. The whole thing is spiritual. You know, look at all these people who aren't drinking. That is spiritual, you know, that come together. And that was enough for me. You know, she had me go around and ask people with time what the first step meant, and they all said vigilance, to be ever vigilant that I'm an alcoholic. Then on the second step, I remember asking Greg Morley, used to work at Molina Lodge in New Jersey, about the second step. And he said to him, this was the one that made the most sense to me, that faith was like the wind. You couldn't see it, but you could see the effect it had on everything around it. That I loved, you know. I proceeded to wait for God to show me some burning bush. I went down to Key West, and I asked everybody when to do the 4-step, and I got a million different answers. You haven't done it yet, step a year, like a million different answers. And for my personality, that's not good. So I remember I came back, and I was working in the restaurant. Nobody was there. I was sitting at the bar. I was reading an article. My sponsor had me praying, which I would do in the dark, because God, I didn't want anybody to see me doing it. I might be doing it wrong. And I went into the bathroom, and I got on my knees, and I remember saying, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you are, but you can have me. And the next night I went to my literature meeting, because my sponsor had me go. I was allowed to go to one beginner's meeting after my first 30 days, and then the rest were to be literature or speaker meetings, because I already knew about the problem, and I needed to hear about the solution. And I was in my step meeting, and I was real mochas in and out, and then they were reading the 3rd step, and they got to the last 2 pages. Bam, my ears opened up. You know, so how exactly can the newcomer turn his will and his life over? You know, attendance at meetings is great, but it's bound to be a far cry from a useful, contented life. And then it goes on, it just says, you know, how will he win back the affection of his family, the bridges he's burned? And then it says, you know, how does he do that? How do you turn your will and your life over? By working the rest of the steps. And I went up to my sponsor after, and she said, "Take time." And she gave, you know, pen and paper, and I did my 4-step. And my 5th step, she said, Kris, where do you find God? And I had this blank look. And she goes, how about if we go where I find God? And she took me to this beautiful quarry, and I did my 5th step. And she started out with something about affairs, you know, in her own life, and made me feel at peace. And so, you know, I got to about step 7 with her, and she she was starting a business and said, I can't sponsor you. So I got Tara, that woman who talked me through the snowstorm, to be my sponsor. But I will say this, you know, they told me when I came in I had to find a power greater than myself, and that was the purpose of the big book, was to help me find a power greater than myself. They told me one day my only defense against a drink was going to be that of a loving higher power, right? So I was about 9 months sober. I went to my daughter's back to school night. I pick up her paper, drawing, and I turn it over, and it says, Devin does not learn auditorily. And I was a mess because I drank when I was pregnant with her. And I ran out of that meeting, got in my car, drove. I didn't have a cell phone because they were like this big. They were Poconos anyway. But I'm driving, and I get to a T in the road. I'm heading towards my meeting. And there's a bar there. And I sat there for 10 minutes looking at those neon lights. It was my kind of bar, too, dartboards jukebox, old honky-tonk kind of place, right? So I sat there for 10 minutes, and finally I said, please help me. And I made a right, and I ended up at my meeting. So I have that lived experience. Today with cell phones, it's so easy to pick up the phone and call somebody else. And I'm not going to say that people don't talk to me through God doesn't talk to me through people, but I believe that, that my sponsor having me praying, me working the steps, because somewhere between 6 and 7 is where all of a sudden I got this feeling like I'm going to be okay no matter what happens. God started to enter my life, and so I'm so grateful, honestly, for that moment. I went on, and finished the steps. I know I'm running out of time here, so the 9th step gave me freedom, and I'll talk, first one was to my dad, a couple ones, they were pretty easy, but I've done some really tough ones sober. And I've done ones that have not been accepted well. My ex-husband still will not talk to me. It's, oh my God, 2010, 13 years. He still will not talk to me. But you know what? I'm free. If he shows up at my godson's party, I can let him say hi. I can say, hello, how you doing? He doesn't want me to talk to him. I can honor that. I had another one with a business, a place that I used to take classes and buy paint. And she said, you can still buy paint from me, but you can't take classes with me any longer. I just don't need that. And that goes into my dry junk. So let me talk about some things in recovery. Some really good things, Well, first I ended up in an affair. That was a really good thing. But, because I thought it would never happen sober, But I still really enjoyed flirting. And my marriage wasn't in a good place, and opportunity met desire, and I ended up in a place that was horrible. In my head, I'd be screaming, run, 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 and then I'd have that thing where I got to make this God's will because I can't be that person. And I was at a meeting, my sponsor knew I was at a meeting, and a woman at the podium, this is why I don't share in a general way, because a woman at the podium shared that she had 30 years, that at 9 months sober, she had an affair. And that woman saved my life that night by sharing that, because I went up to her and said, can you be my sponsor? And she sponsored me and worked me through that. And what it was is I didn't know how to end a relationship, and I didn't know how to be in one, and I never took responsibility for my own happiness. So they'd all be great at first, and then they would start to not be so great, all that wears off, and then I'd be like, I must have picked the wrong person. And what I learned in working through it was, first of all, I didn't know men. So I used to go to meetings. I was 30 then. I'd go to meetings, and I would want to hug the guy way over there, and I swear everybody else would get in front, bushy bee. So now what I did is I would walk in, and bushy bee would be, and I'd put my hands up and go, no. And I would walk this way, and I would walk into a meeting, and I'd sit next to a woman women terrified me. And I would say, can I sit next to you? Because I really want to sit next to him. And I worked through the steps. And what I did was I built relationships with women, and then I really built a relationship with the God of my understanding. When I listened to love songs, I made them about my recovery and about God. Boy, that changes songs. Listen to Carly Simon, Haven't Got Time for the Pain. That makes that song so different. So I did all that. It really introduced me to the 6th step in a way, because like I said, I wanted to still flirt. I wasn't willing to give up everything. I wanted to hold on to the stuff that I still got to throw from. You could have all the stuff that caused me problems. And it says that in the 6th step and the 12 and 12. Who doesn't want to be rid of things that cause us problems? But this isn't about our objective. It's about the perfect objective of God. So I had to make, What is the defect? How does it manifest itself? What does it do to me? What does it do for me? Because what it does for me is why I'll keep doing it. Even if the to me's are real big, the for me's are good, I'll do it. And what behaviors do I need to change as an expression of willingness to bring to God? And then I usually have a plan, like I'm going to go to meetings. I'm not going to talk to men. I was married. I had no business talking to men because of my history. So I didn't. I followed the rule of thumb. I didn't say anything to a man that I wouldn't say with my husband right next to me. So we got remarried. We had separated. We got remarried. We had our third child, sober. 4 years later, I had started 2 businesses, also big things, yay. But bad things too. When he was about 4, he was molested by the neighbor. And that really messed us up. I got really mad at God. How could you do this? Why? And that's how I ended up in North Carolina. Moved 600 miles away, and I packed God in a suitcase and put him up on a shelf and said, I'll go to meetings, I'll do everything else, but I don't want a relationship with God. And when I would sit in meetings and hear that absolutely nothing that happens in God's world is a mistake, filled me with rage. So over a 4-year period, down here you read the promises. Over 4 years, they were all erased in my life without a drink. And I lost my marriage. I lost my business. My house was going into foreclosure. So I lost everything sober. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to look at the pain of my grandfather. It forced me to deal with that in a different way. And I can't go back and change it, but I can look at how it affects my life today, and it also made me change. I didn't want to be the person that I had become. And today I'm not that person. And I know that because my kids tell me that, my adult kids. Mom, you took a bad circumstance and you are not that person. They were afraid to be around me. They walked around me on eggshells like I did with my mother. And today I'm not that person. So we got divorced and I met Chip, and then I met Anthony. And Chip was he was a whirlwind, let me tell you. And I love that man with everything. But he kept having reoccurrence after reoccurrence. Fell off the porch, had the spinal cord injury. And then a couple of years ago, he started using again. I knew something was going up, and I had to make him leave, which was really hard. I didn't want to be the girl that kicked out the disabled guy, but I found him an apartment that was safe. It took me 3 months. I moved him in, and 39 days later, I went to his apartment and found him deceased. I had seen him 3 days before. He was at my house for dinner on a Tuesday night. Friday morning, I called Anthony. Anthony, can you text? Because he's not answering me. And I ended up there that afternoon, and Anthony's the one I called. You have to come now. He's dead. And he's my best friend over there. And so he came, and so I had to walk through that. So the last time I spoke here was well before that. I think when I spoke at your other meeting, I was in the middle of that breakup, kind of going like, I don't know what's going to happen here. And so I walked through that year grieving. I never once thought, like I did when my son was molested, I never once thought God had anything to do with it. God was my strength. I saw the hand of God in so many ways, laid out before me with people, with things before me to even help make those decisions. I was praying before that. Please show me the truth and give me the strength to handle it. And I knew that God was going to make right of it, because in this program, God always makes right of it, right? When I had that dry drunk and I came to, I had to find a new God, a new concept. The God I believed in before was one that would test me, because then I would learn things. I can't have a relationship with that type. This is just for me. What I believe is that life happens. I believe that people make bad decisions. I believe that they impact other people. I make bad decisions. God is my strength. And that's what works for me. And when I die and I go to heaven, if I was wrong, I'm perfectly okay with that, because it's allowed me to live a really good life. With Chip, I knew that something was going to be made of it. So like 5 or 6 months later, I end up down at the RX Summit in Atlanta, meeting somebody from my grief support from California. And I walk up to this meeting, because I'm sober now, I can talk to anybody, right? I can. I walk up to these two guys and I'm talking, and I walk away with a job in grief support. Because that's how God makes right. And I knew it, And now I work in recovery. So there's things there, like for a 10-year period, I lost my painting business. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was lost. Since Chip's death, I have such clarity. And I believe that he helped me. He took me where I needed to be to make decisions that I needed to make. So what else? What is my life like today? I work in recovery today. It's really super cool. Well, now I'm kind of on the business end of it, which is super cool. But I got to talk to a guy today from New Jersey, who I heard the obstacles of why he can't go to treatment. And I was like, there's always going to be obstacles. Where would you like to see yourself in 3 months? It's just really neat to be on it. I have a different take on it because of my experience with Chip. It's a disease. It is a disease. It's really hard when you're family because that's not how you feel. And let me just tell you this really quickly. So anybody who's new, is there anybody here who's new? Okay, your family, right? It can be really hard. I remember my husband being like, you just traded one addiction for another. Now you're never here. What I learned being a family member, going to a treatment center and hearing a neuroscientist talk about what happens to the brains of the family. They talk about what happens to the addict, right? We ingest a drug. It shuts down our frontal cortex. We go to fight or flight. The only thing that satisfies, we've all heard it because we've been to treatment, right? The only thing that satisfies us is more of that drug. And it takes, on average, 14 months to 2 years for that front part of your brain that makes the decision making to start lighting up again in imagery. That's freaking powerful. They weren't talking that when I got sober. So what happens to the family member's brain who lives with us? I can tell you this, your brain is flooded with so much cortisol all the time that it eats holes in your hippocampus, it ages you, it shuts down your frontal cortex, you go to the amygdala, fight or flight, and the only thing that satisfies your brain is trying to keep your addicted loved one safe or trying to control it. Boy, that explained decisions I made, and I hope that you take that with you and show a little bit of compassion for family because they too were impacted by it. Here's the really cool thing. Addiction has a ripple effect. Recovery has a much bigger ripple effect. It has. My kids were impacted by me. My addiction, even though I wasn't drinking because I was still selfish and self-centered, and they know how to make amends. They know how to start their day over. They know how they're much more mature than I am. So anyway, thank you so much for having me. Happy anniversary to you all. I hope I shared and it touched somebody. If it didn't, it's your fault too.
That's probably one of the best speaker meetings I've ever heard.